Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take a stack of sources, articles, research, our own notes, and really extract the most important nuggets of knowledge to get you well-informed fast. And today, well, we're diving into a figure whose predictions have rattled and thrilled people for, 500 years now, a name that still pops up every single time the world feels like it's, on the brink.
It's really quite astonishing, isn't it? Every time there's a major crisis, someone, somewhere, is dusting off their Nostradamus book.
Oh, absolutely. I remember it so clearly. It was 1999. The whole Y2K scare was massive. Everyone was convinced the world was going to end, computers crashing, floods, you name it, just total chaos predicted. And there I was, just a curious fifth grader picking up a book on Nostradamus thinking, okay, if the world's ending, I need to know how this guy apparently saw it coming. It really hammered home for me how fear and uncertainty then and now just drive us to seek answers in things like prophecies.
That's such a key point, that fundamental human need for certainty, especially when things feel deeply uncertain. It's a powerful psychological anchor, and it's definitely fueled the enduring interest in figures like Nostradamus.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we're digging into today. Our mission isn't just about what Nostradamus predicted, though we'll touch on that. We want to unpack who he actually was, the man himself, why his prophecies seem to never fade away, and critically, how they became such a powerful tool to stir up global sentiment, sometimes even serving, specific political agendas.
Right. We'll mention the two main sort of camps, the believers and the skeptics, but our approach here is more balanced, more investigative, inspired by scholars like Ian Wilson, really.
Yeah, we want to understand the man behind the myths, and maybe more importantly, why those myths persist.
It's less about trying to, verify every single prediction word for word, and much more about the huge cultural impact these prophecies have had, how they've been interpreted, sometimes even twisted over the centuries. And to get that, we really have to start right at the beginning of his life.
Okay, let's do it. So Michel de Nostradam, that was his actual name, born 1503, Sarme de Provence, France, puts him squarely in the 16th century Renaissance. What was that world actually like for him growing up?
Oh, it was a time of incredible transformation, but also incredibly turbulent. Just 11 years before he was born, Columbus had sailed, fundamentally changing how Europeans saw the world. Artistically, it was the age of giants, Da Vinci painting the Mona Lisa, Michelangelo carving David, amazing stuff. But underneath all that artistic brilliance, there were these seismic shifts happening, especially in religion and politics.
Right, like Martin Luther, who basically turned the religious world upside down in 1517, challenged the church, kicked off the Reformation.
Exactly. And that led to these really intense religious wars across Europe, Protestant versus Catholic. It was a deeply volatile world for Nostradamus to be born into.
And his own family's story really reflects that volatility, doesn't it?
It really does. His family was Jewish, and they faced intense anti-Jewish sentiment. This was particularly bad after the Black Death back in the 14th century, when Jews were horrifyingly and falsely accused of poisoning wells.
Yeah.
So to survive in that kind of climate, they were basically forced to convert to Christianity.
And there's that fascinating detail about the conversion, the name change. They chose Nostradam.
Yeah, it's quite clever, symbolically. Notre Dame, in French, means Our Lady, referring to the Virgin Mary. So it was this very public declaration of their new Christian faith. Though some historians believe they might have, continued some Jewish practices in private, it must have been an incredibly complex balancing act. Your name itself is a statement.
And that family history seems to have directly shaped him. His great-grandfather, apparently a Jewish doctor himself, knew a lot about astrology and astronomy.
Right. And he gifted young Nostradamus a celestial map, a planisphere, basically an early star chart. That seems to have laid the immediate foundation for his later work, his lifelong fascination with the stars and their meaning.
Which kind of leads us to his early education. He started studying humanities in Avignon, but then, bam, plague outbreak.
Yeah, unlike today, where school might just go online. Back then, it meant everything just stopped, total disruption. And this forced him into this long period, maybe 7 or 8 years, as a wandering herbalist.
Selling what? Like cures for everything?
Pretty much. Hair loss remedies, anti-aging stuff. Apparently, people even called his methods ghost-told medicine, which suggests they thought his remedies were maybe mystical or even supernatural. Not exactly standard practice.
Wow, ghost-told medicine.
Yeah, and despite all the suspicion around Jewish herbalists at the time, people were often desperate enough to buy these remedies anyway.
So after years of this wandering life, he decides to go back to formal education. He's in his 20s now, and he heads to the University of Montpellier to study medicine, which was quite a place, right?
Oh, Montpellier was very prestigious and pretty unique for its time. It was one of the very few places actually allowed to perform human dissections.
Because the church generally forbade that.
Exactly. The church largely banned it, considered it sinful.
Right.
The body needed to be preserved for the Last Judgment. But Montpellier got this special permission from the local lord they could dissect executed criminals twice a year. It made it a real center for anatomical study.
So he gets into this, cutting-edge medical school, but it wasn't exactly smooth sailing for him.
No, apparently not. There are records suggesting he was expelled, possibly for criticizing professors, and also because of his past as an apothecary or herbalist, which was seen as manual trade, beneath a physician.
Oh, really? So being an herbalist was frowned upon.
By the academic physicians, yes. Though there's debate about his degree, some think he might have studied later under an Italian doctor called Salis. The exact details are a bit murky.
So did his sort of unconventional background make him stand out even there?
I think it must have. And it's really important to remember that a 16th century physician was vastly different from our idea of a doctor today. Medical theory was still dominated by things like the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Illness was seen as an imbalance.
So practices like bloodletting were common.
Very common. So even when Nostradamus got his medical degree, he was operating within this framework. You have to picture him, this guy with a background in, well, ghost-told medicine, navigating that traditional system. His mix of practical remedies and later astrological insights must have really set him apart.
And this is where his childhood comes back in, right? The astrology connection. Because astrology and medicine were linked back then.
Absolutely integral. There was literally a saying, a doctor without astrology is a blind man. So his medical training and his early knowledge of the stars weren't separate things. They were expected to work together. It wasn't some weird hobby.
Okay, so that intertwining of medicine and astrology is pretty crucial for understanding what comes next. Why Europe in the mid-16th century was so ready, almost desperate for prophecies.
Yes, the whole era was just incredibly chaotic.
It really was a mess. You had, first, all the religious upheaval. Erasmus finding Bible translation errors, shaking the church's authority. Then 1517, Luther and the Reformation splitting Christianity wide open. That led to terrible conflicts. Catholic versus Protestant, like in Germany. And then you had Henry VIII in England breaking from Rome just because he wanted a divorce, forming the Church of England.
And besides all that internal religious fighting, there were major external threats too. The Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent was pushing into Europe, a huge perceived threat from the south.
Okay, so religious wars, external military threats. What else?
Add environmental stress to the mix. Records show there were these periods of abnormally cold, long winters, followed by really severe droughts. Just adds another layer of anxiety and hardship.
So with all of that going on, religious chaos, war, weird weather, how did that translate into people desperately wanting prophecies?
Well, it fueled this widespread feeling that the world is ending. Seriously. People were looking for signs everywhere. They pointed to dates like 1533, exactly 1,500 years after Jesus' crucifixion at age 33, as significant. You even see it reflected in the art, like Michelangelo's famous painting, The Last Judgment. It's basically a giant painting of the apocalypse. It captures that pervasive cultural fear.
So when life feels completely out of control, people just start searching desperately for some kind of pattern, some meaning, some sign. It's all going somewhere predetermined.
Exactly. The human mind craves order in chaos. And prophecies offer a sense of that, even if the prophecies themselves are frightening.
And for Nostradamus personally, this chaotic time led to more trouble.
Yes, King Francis I, who was a very staunch Catholic, brought in these anti-heresy policies. They specifically targeted people like doctors who practiced things the church didn't approve of, which included astrology.
So Nostradamus, mixing medicine and astrology, was directly in the firing line.
Pretty much. It seems he was forced to flee again, spending time traveling as a sort of wandering physician to avoid persecution.
It's during this period he writes his first book, the one that wasn't very popular.
That's right. Hieroglyphic Apollo, or Horus Apollo, focused on Egyptian mysticism. But it's significant because this is where he first uses the Latinized pen name Nostradamus.
Ah, so that's when Nostradamus, the name we know, appears, hinting at bigger ambitions.
Definitely seems that way. He was clearly trying to brand himself as something more than just a traveling doctor or herbalist. He wanted to be a writer, an intellectual figure.
Okay, but things eventually look up for him.
Yes. A new chapter starts around 1547. His father died. He returned home, remarried a woman named Anne Ponsard. They had 6 children together. And importantly, he settled down in Salon de Provence.
And the ruler there, King Henry II, was maybe less hostile?
Apparently so. He finally found some stability, which is really what set the stage for his rise to fame.
And that fame, interestingly, didn't initially come from the prophecies book, did it?
No, not at all initially. What really made him famous first were his astrological almanacs. These things were hugely popular.
Right, they were like practical guides, daily horoscopes mixed with other stuff.
Exactly. Really practical stuff for everyday life. Auspicious days for planting crops or starting journeys, gardening tips, little historical facts. It was precisely what an anxious population, craving guidance and a sense of control, wanted to buy.
So these almanacs take off, and then comes the really bold move in 1555.
Yeah, in his almanac for that year, he actually dared to predict danger for King Henry II himself, by name, which was, incredibly risky.
And then that got him noticed.
Oh, immediately. Summons to Paris, straight away.
Wow. So he goes to Paris, meets King Henry II and Queen Catherine de' Medici, and Catherine was already into this sort of thing.
Very much so. Her family, the Medicis, had produced two popes. She'd struggled with infertility for years, and her husband, the king, had a very prominent, very public mistress, Diane de Poitiers. So Catherine was desperately looking for answers, for insights into her future, her children's future. Horoscopes were right up her alley.
Okay, but then there's that amazing personal detail. Before he even goes into the palace.
Right, he consults his own charts, does his own astrological reading, and he foresees his own death, specifically by beheading on August 25th.
No way.
Yes, and this vision absolutely terrified him. So much so that he refused to sleep in the palace. He stayed at a cardinal's house nearby for 12 days instead. He was essentially, fleeing his own prophecy.
That's incredible. It really suggests he genuinely believed in his own visions, doesn't it? If he was scared of his own prediction.
It strongly suggests that, yes.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a performance for others, it seems.
So if he's terrified, why does he suddenly bolt from court after those 12 days?
Well, the story goes he made a very sudden departure. He later claimed in a letter that a high-ranking lady, and people speculate this might have been Diane de Poitiers, the king's mistress, maybe using him for her own games, had warned him that King Henry, being a devout Catholic, was actually deeply opposed to seers and might be planning something against him.
Okay, so maybe a genuine warning, maybe political maneuvering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, his letter explaining his hasty departure also used it as an excuse to dodge paying back a debt.
Get out! Seriously.
Yeah. He apparently owed money to someone at court and basically wrote, "Look, I have to flee for my life. Terribly sorry. Can't pay you back right now."
A shrewd operator, like you said.
Ah, that's brilliant. He was definitely playing the angles.
Yeah.
And we know a lot of these details because of his secretary, Jean de Chavigny, yes, his personal secretary. He documented much of Nostradamus' life, transcribed his prophecies. Apparently, Nostradamus' handwriting was terrible. Chavigny is a key source, but it's also a good reminder, So much of history comes filtered through these personal accounts, which always have their own potential biases. Chavigny definitely helped shape the legend, especially after Nostradamus died, by continuing to sell the prophecies.
And Nostradamus himself kept playing that political game, right? Even with the almanacs.
Absolutely. That political shrewdness is really clear. He didn't just dedicate his almanacs to the Catholic King Henry II and Queen Catherine. He also dedicated some to Antoine de Navarre, who was a prominent Protestant king.
Smart, covering his bases.
Exactly. It shows this calculated strategy to stay connected to all the major political factions. Whoever came out on top, he wanted to make sure he had some connection, some protection. He knew how to survive.
Okay, so by 1559, Nostradamus is this well-known figure, mainly thanks to the almanacs. But his big book, The Prophecies, first published in 1555, hadn't quite hit legendary status yet. That changed dramatically with King Henry II's death, didn't it?
It changed everything. You remember that specific quatrain? And a quatrain is just a 4-line verse, the one about the young lion overcoming the older one on the battlefield.
Vaguely. Something about piercing eyes through a golden cage.
That's the one. He will pierce his eyes through a cage of gold. 2 wounds made one, then he dies a cruel death. Well, in 1559, during a jousting tournament celebrating a peace treaty,
A joust.
the King Henry II was jousting against the Count of Montgomery, the young lion. Montgomery's lance shattered. A splinter went through the king's helmet visor, the golden cage, and pierced his eye and temple. 2 wounds, effectively becoming one fatal injury.
Oh, wow.
The king suffered horribly for 9 or 10 days, then died. This event, seeming to match the quatrain so precisely, just made Nostradamus' prophecies explode in popularity. It cemented his fame almost overnight, 4 years after the book came out.
That sounds incredibly specific, almost undeniable.
Yeah.
But is there a part of you, the skeptical part, that wonders if people just made it fit after the fact? How much interpretation was involved?
That is exactly the critical question, isn't it? And the answer is probably a lot. The prophecies became so enduring precisely because they are so incredibly vague, poetic, written in this mix of French, Latin, Greek, Provençal,
It's so deliberately ambiguous.
or just written in a style that allows for ambiguity. They span centuries, right? From 1555 supposedly all the way to the year 3797. This vast scope and vague language mean you can find something in there to fit almost any major event, especially if you're willing to, let's say, interpret creatively. Twist the words a bit.
Okay, give me another example of that, after the king's death.
Well, the Great Fire of London in 1666 is a classic one. There's a quatrain that mentions the blood of the just will commit a fault at London, birth through lightning of 23 is the 6.
23 is the 6.
People interpreted 23 is the 6 as 20 times 3, 60 plus 6 equals 66, 1666. And it explicitly mentions London. It seemed like this perfect prediction over a century after Nostradamus died.
Wow.
Of course, skeptics point out flaws in the interpretation, but for believers, it was huge. And when inconsistencies arose, devotees would sometimes argue he saw the event from a, quote, different camera angle, allowing for this interpretive flexibility.
A different camera angle, that's handy.
Isn't it? And it wasn't just fires. Fast forward a couple more centuries, there's a quatrain mentioning a powerful ruler rising near Italy, from the name which no French king ever had.
Okay.
This was famously linked to Napoleon Bonaparte. He rose near Italy, Corsica, and he wasn't a king by birthright. He was an emperor, a title no French king had ever held.
So again, looking back after Napoleon's rise, people found the verse and said, ah, that must be him.
Precisely. It shows how historical knowledge completely shapes how you read these things. It's like, imagine taking a beautiful, complex Thai poem,
Right.
translate it roughly into Old French, then translate that into modern English, then wait 500 years.
Okay.
The meaning is going to shift and warp completely depending on who's reading it, what they know about history, and frankly, what they want it to mean.
Right. And that wanting it to mean something leads to more, well, sinister uses too, doesn't it? Like in World War II.
Oh, absolutely. This is where it gets really dark. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda chief, actually commissioned new interpretations of Nostradamus
Really?
to boost German morale and predict England's defeat. They dropped pamphlets, made radio broadcasts, all citing these ancient prophecies that supposedly foretold a Nazi victory. It was pure psychological warfare.
Believe it or not, yes. British intelligence caught on and started circulating their own counter-prophecies, interpreting Nostradamus to predict Germany's downfall.
So both sides were using him as a weapon. Exactly. It shows how these texts became tools, completely divorced from whatever Nostradamus might have originally intended, and used purely for strategic messaging to sway public opinion. Less about foresight, all about influence.
Which brings us to maybe the most famous or infamous modern example, the 9/11 prophecy.
Ah, yes. So many people have heard this one, maybe even you listening right now. The quatrain that goes something like, 2 steel birds will fall from the sky on the metropolis. The sky will burn at 45 degrees latitude.
Yeah, I remember seeing that everywhere online after 9/11. It sounds so chillingly specific. 2 steel birds, the metropolis, the sky burning.
It does sound incredibly precise. And it spread like wildfire through emails and websites. It seemed like the ultimate proof of Nostradamus' power.
But I sense a but coming.
But here's the shocking truth. The ultimate fabrication, that widely circulated, incredibly specific prophecy, it is not found anywhere in Nostradamus' actual published works.
Wait, what? It's not real.
It's not real. It's a modern invention, probably created sometime after the event, maybe by enthusiastic devotees wanting to keep him relevant, maybe by someone else entirely. It cleverly mixes real Nostradamus phrases with completely fabricated lines to make it seem authentic and directly about 9/11.
That's staggering. So it was just made up.
Completely made up and passed off as genuine.
So what do these examples, especially that bombshell about the 9/11 one, what do they really tell us about how information and maybe history itself works?
Well, they reveal something absolutely crucial, I think. Information, especially sensational stuff, isn't static. It's constantly being interpreted, added to, subtracted from, spun by whoever is telling the story. Often there's a specific agenda behind it. What these examples really show isn't just that prophecies are vague, but that our own minds are wired to find patterns. We crave meaning, especially in chaotic events.
We're susceptible to confirmation bias, seeing what we expect or want to see.
Hugely susceptible. which means, in a way, we, the audience, become the prophets as much as Nostradamus ever was. We actively construct the meaning. So it stops being about simple true or false and becomes about how these stories are built, how they're consumed, and who benefits.
And Nostradamus himself, how did his story actually end?
His actual death was relatively mundane, considering his reputation. He died in 1566, around 63 years old, apparently from complications of gout, which he'd suffered from for years.
Did he predict his own death?
Well, his secretary, Chavigny, claimed Nostradamus told him the night before, "You will not find me alive at sunrise." But again, that's Chavigny's account years later.
Right. Always the filter. And even after his death, the legend kept growing. That story about the necklace.
Ah, yes, the necklace story. Years later, supposedly in 1700, his tomb was opened during renovations or maybe disturbed by soldiers. And the legend claims they found his skeleton wearing a medallion inscribed with the date 1700.
Whoa. As if he predicted the very year his tomb would be opened.
Exactly. It's a fantastic story, adds to the mystique. But historical evidence for it is basically non-existent. It's almost certainly a later embellishment.
Another layer added to the legend.
Precisely. But it shows how his prophecies didn't just fade away. They became this incredibly useful tool, a kind of blank canvas for people to project their hopes, their fears, their political goals onto. The accuracy often had far less to do with Nostradamus' original words and far more to do with the reader's desperate need for it to be accurate and their willingness to, bend the meanings.
So the big question then, was Nostradamus truly great because he could see the future? Or is his enduring fame more about us, the readers, the interpreters, the spin doctors over 500 years, constantly keeping the legend alive by reinterpreting and sometimes, like with 9/11, just plain fabricating things to fit?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it?
It's wild to think about. I mean, for me, going back to this now, remembering myself as that fifth grader scared about Y2K, and now looking at it through this lens of historical interpretation, manipulation, it's a completely different experience.
It really makes you question things. So, do we think he genuinely saw the future? Well, he clearly had a strong foundation in astrology, thanks to his great-grandfather, and his medical practice used it. That's normal for the time. But the sheer volume of prophecies he produced, hundreds and hundreds of quatrains, that makes you wonder. Perhaps some flashes of insight felt real to him. Maybe some were uncanny guesses based on his knowledge of history and politics. But it's also possible many were sort of filled in.
Filled in out of necessity.
Maybe. I mean, a prophet in the 16th century still had to make a living, right? He had almanacs to publish, deadlines to meet, a bit like, dare I say, a podcaster trying to create hundreds of deep dives. You have production demands.
Huh. That's a great point. Maybe he's just trying to hit his quota sometimes. So what's the final takeaway for you listening to all this?
Well, we hope this deep dive encourages you to engage critically with all kinds of historical narratives, really any information you encounter. Understand that every story is told from a particular perspective. It's shaped by time, by translation, sometimes by a very deliberate agenda.
Yeah, think about how your own biases, your own desire to find patterns or meaning might be shaping how you interpret information, what you accept as truth.
Nostradamus' enduring, ever-changing legacy is just one really powerful example of how the past isn't this fixed, solid thing we sometimes imagine it to be. Our understanding of it, our interpretation is constantly evolving, and maybe that's the most fascinating prophecy of all.